First off, I just want to thank the class of 2020 for choosing me to speak in graduation. Here's my speech, and I hope you like it. My path to Nobles was far from ordinary. Back in the year 2014, I was a 7th grader living in a tiny Vermont town, traveling at least 3 hours every weekend to play hockey games in Boston. One day in January, after a game in Saugus, my mother told me we weren't going home. She said, "We are staying at your cousin's house tonight, and we are touring Nobles tomorrow." In the Vermont town we lived in, there was no public high school, so it wasn't unusual for kids in 8th grade to look at a variety of schools. But I was in 7th grade, a year away from having to worry about that, so it was a little confusing. But I'm a pretty calm guy, so I just went with the flow. When I got on campus, the first thing I noticed was the castle, 3 times bigger than my tiny Vermont school that had 10 kids per grade. I thought that a place like Nobles would never accept some small town Vermont kid, but I did my interview, and we drove back home. About a week later, I was told the real reason that I went to Nobles that day. I'm paraphrasing here, but my mother in a more loving way said to me, "Will, your aunt has cancer, and we are moving to Boston." In life, we make sacrifices for those we love. And when I heard the word cancer, I knew I had to be mature. I knew I had to make sacrifices, because I love my aunt, and I love my family. I was accepted to Nobles, and I acted excited. But there was so much fear and uncertainty inside of me about whether my aunt would be okay, and whether I would. I had to come to terms with the fact that I would never be an 8th grader at my Vermont middle school, where being in 8th grade is the equivalent of being a senior. I wouldn't have that long-awaited chance to finally be the oldest and best player on the team, or the star of the spring play, or attend my 8th grade graduation at our town hall. Instead, I went to Nobles. When I got to Nobles, I was the oldest in the class because I had repeated a grade, and there were many times where I felt like I didn't belong there. During study hall, I would go on Google Earth on my iPad to zoom in on my old town in Vermont, wishing I was back home. My homesickness was taking a toll on me. So there was one day, I just looked in the mirror and said, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Move on." There was nothing I loved more than hockey, so I decided I would put all of my efforts into training for hockey tryouts the next year. I was not a recruit, and the coaches had no clue who I was, but I threw everything into it and made the team as a freshman. We had a terrible season that year, but the guys took me in as their brother. I now had a school family to add to my extended Boston family. That same year, to the utter shock and confusion of my completely unreligious parents, I decided on my own to take confirmation classes and start attending the church down the street. The minister discovered that I had never had a baptism, which is a prerequisite for confirmation. We set a date in May, and she told me to select 2 godparents to sponsor me. This being April, the hockey group chat had been dead for a while, but one night, out of the blue, I typed, "Who wants to be my godfather?" To my surprise, my phone started exploding. After scrolling through a series of proposals, I decided on John Murray and Pierce Kenny, also known as Muzz and PK. A few minutes later, one of our captains changed the name of the group chat to Countdown to Donnie's Baptism. My hockey nickname is Donnie. It's a long story that I won't get into. When I told the minister that 2 hockey teammates, one of whom is a year younger than me, were going to be my godfathers, she surprisingly loved the idea. The morning of the baptism, I cut my lips shaving and was convinced it was a sign from God that the baptism would be a disaster. But all of a sudden, 20 hockey players poured through the doors. The congregation, now outnumbered, looked stunned as this throng of adolescents in suits squeezed into the family section. Muzz immediately made fun of my cut lip, and I started laughing, and it eased my nerves. Thank you for that, Muzz. A blast of the organ announced the start of the service, and my team respectfully followed along, singing hymns and reciting passages. That day, Noah, who is Jewish, took his first communion, believe it or not. Muzz and PK delivered their godfatherly vows to perfection, and after the minister poured holy water on my head, the team let out a cheer. Now came the part where the minister would typically circumnavigate the church, hoisting a baby for all to behold. Instead, she paraded me and my band of teammates up and down the aisles. Moments later, Snapchat blew up with photos, videos, and captions like, "Donnie is a son of God," and "Congrats to my boy Donnie on his commitment to heaven." This was just one example of when the Nobles community has shown up for me and poured out love and support when I most needed it. And it was one of the happiest days of my life. This spring, our class learned that due to coronavirus, we would not be going back to Nobles for our senior spring, or experiencing the traditional graduation ceremony. It felt a bit like deja vu, like back in 2014 when I learned that I would never get to experience graduating from 8th grade. Anyone that knows me knows I love movies. And I, like everyone, wanted that fairy tale ending to our senior year like you see in the movies. But it's not like all the best movies are high school movies. And I'm sure someone is going to whip up a damn good COVID-19 movie. Yes, we missed out on some traditions, but we're also a part of history. I feel so lucky to have gone to Nobles and to have been in the same grade with so many remarkable people who I've learned so much from. Yes, I still sometimes miss my home in Vermont and my old friends and old life. But the thing I miss most right now is being with all of you. You realize how much you miss something when it's gone, but you guys aren't gone forever. When this is all over, we will be able to see each other again. And that moment, being reunited with all of you, will be so much sweeter because of our time apart. Thank you. God bless.